at the beginning of the cycle, you have this pool of follicles, and that pool of follicles is related to how many eggs you have left. So therefore it's related to your age. And that pool is going to be larger when you're 20 versus when you're 30 and when you're 40. There's always going to be this decline. As we discussed, when you're in utero, you have more eggs than when you're born. You have more eggs when you're born than you do at puberty. And there's a gradual kind of this natural process.
Welcome to the Truth and Fertility Podcast. I'm Haley, wife, mom, and a fertility charting instructor, here to teach you the undeniable truth about your fertility. So let's get started.
Welcome back to the Truth and Fertility Podcast. Today, I am so excited to be sitting down with Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. She is a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner who trains women's health practitioners to use their menstrual cycle as a vital sign. So important. In their practices. So she is the founder of Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. I'll have everything in the links below as well, in the show notes below. She is the author of 3 best-selling books, The Fifth Vital Sign, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook, and her most recent book, Real Food for Fertility, which she co-authored with Lily Nichols. Lisa works tirelessly to debunk the myth that regular ovulation is only important when you want children, by recognizing the menstrual cycle as a vital sign. Drawing heavily from the current scientific literature, Lisa presents an evidence-based approach to help women connect to their fifth vital sign by uncovering the connection between the menstrual cycle, fertility, and overall health. With well over 4 million downloads, her podcast, Fertility Friday, is the #1 source for information about fertility awareness and menstrual cycle health. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited for our conversation because we're going to be diving into egg quality today. This is something that I don't know a whole lot about. I want to really just dive in for the beginner of understanding egg quality, why that's important. I talk a lot about hormones on this podcast, and I know that there is a hormone that can help us understand the quality of your eggs, the quantity of your eggs, but really diving deep into that. But before we get into that stuff, though, I really want to go over why are we calling the menstrual cycle a fifth vital sign? Like, that is, we were talking about this before recording, but like, that is your bread and butter. You have a book called The Fifth Vital Sign. So tell us a little bit about that. Why is the menstrual cycle a fifth vital sign?
Well, when we think about what the vital signs are, the kind of formally accepted vital signs, they're a measure of how the body is functioning. So if you think about your blood pressure or your heart rate or your respiratory rate or your body temperature, I mean, if you were to go to a doctor and they were to measure these signs, first of all, each of these signs does have an established range of what normal is. And if the measure is above or below, not only does it give some general information about, there's generally something going on here, but if your blood pressure is too high, we kind of know that there's several things that can cause that. So it also gives a place to start. And in the same way, when we look at the menstrual cycle as a vital sign, and of course, when I say the menstrual cycle, I don't just mean the period. I think this is becoming more well-known now, but I remember when I was first doing interviews, I would say menstrual cycle and everyone would think immediately period, but we're looking at the time from the first day of your period up until the last day before the next one. We can divide your cycle into a variety of different parts. We can look at menstruation and we can look at that phase and look at what's normal for that phase. We can look at the pre-ovulatory phase as a whole. We could look at your mucus patterns. We could look at your post-ovulatory phase. We can look at when ovulation is happening in the cycle and how long your cycle is overall. And all of those factors give us information in different ways about what could be going on. And so I think the main point of it is that our menstrual cycle isn't solely about reproduction, because it is an integral part of every woman of reproductive age. And I think what's interesting is we gain insights from, birth control, hormonal birth control, because if all it had to do with was reproduction, then when we shut down ovulation, that's all that would be affected. But if we look at the side effect profile of contraceptives, there's a lot of different things that are affected, from our mood and our emotions to the way we process nutrients, the pills associated with a significant number of nutrient deficiencies, because it kind of changes the way we metabolize those things. So, it is an integral part of our how our body's functioning. And imagine how different the world would be if, instead of thinking of it as like this horrible thing, that we were taught that our menstrual cycle is an integral part of how how we are built, how we're designed. And it also gives us feedback all the time. So if it's off, it actually means that we have some work to do regarding our hormones or our nutrition or whatever the case is. I feel like the world would be really different if we looked at it like that.
Yeah, for sure. And it actually makes me, it reminds me of a podcast episode that you had. I believe it was within the last few months. You were interviewing, it was a researcher, but she was like in psychology or therapy or something. And she was talking about,
yeah.
yeah.
The menstrual, because her name is escaping me right now, but I think you're talking about the researcher who, she literally was the lead researcher on the paper that was arguing that the menstrual cycle should be the fifth vital sign for psychiatry.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. And so even this shouldn't just be a question that your OBGYN is asking you of how are your cycles doing? Like this should be a question your therapist is asking you. This should be a question that whoever you're seeing, right, is asking you, because it is so integral to women's health and to the women's body. So yeah,
I just want to say a quick thing, because I can just imagine the listeners who are like, what are they talking about, right? How could this be related? So without going into the whole rabbit hole, because I'm sure you can link the podcast, it's like you look at the stats and it's astounding. So for example, women who struggle with depression or other mental health issues, the amount of hospital admissions skyrocket statistically during that week before menstruation. So it's not even just like a thing that we're having a cute conversation about. There's actual stats and data that are so compelling that we all should be asking what's going on with the cycle, even in issues of psychiatric medicine, which is to me, because I've been in the field for so long, it's like, of course. But to others who haven't really thought about this or spent like 20 years thinking about it, it's like, wow, but the facts are right there in front of us.
Yeah, exactly. And we could also probably go down that rabbit hole too. Again, there's so many trajectories we could go. But I do want to talk about egg quality with you because, again, like I said, this is not something that I know a whole lot about. So you're the perfect person to ask. So when we're talking about the menstrual cycle as a fifth vital sign, right? A lot of that, most of that is hormones. We're talking about hormone balances. When I assume too, and maybe I'm incorrect in assuming this, but you said that most hospitalizations for women occur the week before their period. I wonder if that's because they're experiencing intense PMS, because maybe they have low progesterone or something to that extent,
well,
right? That's
if you think about it, an argument could be made that intense PMS is PMDD, a psychiatric disorder, right?
Yes.
And they're often thought of as very different, and the research says a lot of interesting things about it, but ultimately, and that's when I tell you it's a rabbit hole, it's a whole rabbit hole, because I also recently, I do all these episodes, as on research papers, because of course that satisfies my nerd and is very interesting to my audience. But it's interesting how they talk about PMDD, because for PMS, there's enough research for us to know that if we look at the menstrual cycle, we just kind of talked about how it's a vital sign, and in the second half of the cycle is when we produce our progesterone. And this relates also to egg quality in a way, because our hormone production that we have throughout the cycle is related to how well that egg has formed and developed. Like, it's all connected. And so, for example, even the size of the follicle that they can measure on ultrasound, they can measure to see how it's growing and developing. And the size of it is related to the health of it, is related to how much hormone output is, so they could even see if it's developing optimally for that. And anyway, so in the post-ovulatory phase, when we're supposed to be producing progesterone, we know with PMS that those symptoms, moderate to severe PMS symptoms, are related to subpar hormone production. And what's interesting about charting, so when you go into it with the lens of cycle charting and we're actually tracking in a really detailed way, you can sometimes see that, if you're familiar, for anyone, just to give that brief lesson of what the temperature does. So progesterone has a thermogenic effect on the body. So after we ovulate, if we're tracking our temperature each day, we'll see that rise. And in a healthy cycle, you would expect that second half of the cycle to be about 12 to 14 days, because that's about how long the corpus luteum is how long it lives when it's healthy. And so when you're taking your temperature, you kind of expect to see like a curve, like the temperature kind of rises. And it's not to say that it's like directly only related to progesterone, because of course our temperature can also fluctuate if different things are happening. If you drink a glass of wine and stuff. But generally speaking, you would expect to see like a curve. So kind of like a curve up and down. And then it would be the highest, the top of the peak of the curve would be mid-luteal. So maybe about, 7 days or so after ovulation.
Mm-hmm.
And then in a healthy cycle, you'd expect to see it kind of gradually drop. The key word being gradual. Women with PMS often see a different kind of pattern. So if we look at some, research texts that actually track progesterone levels, like they have these women go in and do tests like every 3 days or something in the whole luteal, you'll see the curve and the pattern. And on the cycle, sometimes you'll see that if the luteal phase is too short, you'll see the progesterone kind of rise, like you'll see the temperature go up, but then you'll see it like sharply drop and drop off, and then you'll see the period come early. So what's interesting about it is that we already know that PMS is associated with suboptimal progesterone levels, right? And then PMDD is an exacerbated level of that, where it's causing, part of the definition of it is that it's interfering with your ability to do your day-to-day tasks. You're not able to go to work, you're not able to do things. So it's having this dramatic effect. But interestingly, I mean, it's happening cyclically. It's happening at this time of the cycle. They have all these, one of the papers that I was looking at was so interesting because they were saying that, well, we don't think that it's related to having low progesterone. So we think it's that women with PMDD are just more sensitive to the hormones, and that's why it's affecting them. But when you look at the study design, they only did a spot test for progesterone mid-luteal.
Only one
They
test?
weren't actually, yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
they tested like estrogen one day of the cycle and progesterone one day of the cycle, but it was like maybe day 6 post-op or something. And so logically, like knowing what I know about the cycle and knowing what I've seen, you can't actually then make a firm statement to say, definitely it has nothing to do with hormones, but that's what they did.
Yeah.
You could have that as a hypothesis, but truly, if you wanted to test that hypothesis, you would have to test the progesterone, and this would make in all fairness, this would make the experiment very expensive. It would make it very inconvenient. You'd have a lot more drop off because you'd have to actually test that progesterone potentially every other day or something like that. You'd have to take at least, in my
You
perfect
can't
world,
just
at
have
least like
one
6
point.
spot tests. Well,
Right.
yeah, because what we're talking about is this potential drop in progesterone during the week before menstruation. So you can't just take one test before that week and then go on to explain that the hormones have nothing to do with it. So, I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole, right? And a big piece of it is that as women, they're not really studying us properly.
Yeah.
Because we're not starting from the fundamental understanding of how the menstrual cycle works. We're not starting from that fundamental understanding that the menstrual cycle is a vital sign. We're starting from a totally different spot, kind of like we're just like men and we just have to do a spot test, and like women's hormones are the same all the time. Like men's testosterones have a, daily circadian situation. So they're kind of like already biased in how they're even testing and then coming up with conclusions based on these tests. So we have a long way to go before we actually get some real answers.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it's good too to have people like you that are in the research world or that just kind of nerd out about research to be able to see where the shortcomings are in this research. Because like you said, if you're just taking that one, and even whether it's for the sake of research or for the sake of actually helping a woman feel better, right? We should not just be testing progesterone one day of that post-ovulation phase. Like we need to have at least 2 points, if not doing it every other day, just to make sure that we are seeing that bell curve, like you said, that's the optimal curve of progesterone. So let's go into egg quality, because you did mention how progesterone can have an effect on egg quality. So this is what I know, and I want you to build off of this. So I know that a baby girl in gestation, I've heard about 20 weeks gestation, she has all of the eggs that she will ever have. And after that, it's a matter of them depleting. They either, atrophy, or when she's 12, 13, 14, has her period, she starts ovulating them. So we have all the eggs that we're ever going to have. We're not making any more eggs. So what does it mean to have good egg quality? Is that something that we're born with? Is that something that we can improve over time if we have the set amount of eggs that we have? Why don't you build on that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think from the start, what's going to be helpful for this conversation is to delineate quality and quantity, because these things are very different. And, when we get into even how they're kind of measuring, they are conflated. And so the quality is when we look at, for example, the ovarian reserve assessments and things like that, they can't tell you quality. They can kind of estimate quantity. But before we get into that, to kind of set the stage, so as women, when we're born with an estimated 500,000 to 1,000,000 eggs or so, which is
Wow.
really interesting. And that number is actually way higher when we're in utero. So when we're in utero, like you said, at 20 weeks gestation, we have even more, so an estimated 6 to 7 million follicles we may have at like 20 weeks gestation when we're still in the womb. But by the time we're born, it's down to about 500,000 to 1,000,000. And then
Do you mind if I stop you really quick?
Yeah.
What happens to those couple million between 20 weeks in utero and being born? What happens to those?
So it's follicular atresia. It's the natural process of just how they're kind of reabsorbed. And this is something that happens then throughout our reproductive lives, which is really interesting. So, we're born with all these eggs, and even though we're not ovulating until puberty, by the time we hit puberty, that number is still down a little bit. So an estimated like 400,000 around that time. And again, like you're not ovulating, but it's just this kind of natural process that is taking place.
Got it.
And so in terms of quality, I think what's interesting about your question, because it was kind of like we're born with all these eggs, is the quality set. Well, the quantity is set, and these eggs are not like ready to ovulate. So the eggs that we have are in a certain stage. They're in a dormant stage. And then when we hit puberty, that is when this process starts taking place. And it's really interesting looking at the research. And when Lily and I were writing about egg quality in Real Food for Fertility, I mean, we have this 3-month period before ovulation that is most susceptible to nutritional input. So we do have an impact to some degree on the quality of our eggs, or we wouldn't even be having this conversation, right? We can impact that to some degree, but those eggs, they start developing even kind of 7 to 8, like they're there, but they kind of start preparing and start developing for ovulation, even 7 to 8 months before. So it's interesting when you read the research, they're kind of like, so this process is, we anticipate based on what we know to take greater than 220 days. But we know that kind of during that 3 to 4 month period leading up to it is when it's most susceptible to those nutritional inputs. So then, what's happening throughout our reproductive lives is that when you hit puberty, at the very beginning of the cycle, you have this kind of cohort of follicles that have been developing all that time. So whatever's happening today in your cycle is based on what was kind of those nutritional inputs during those last 3 to 4 months. But at the very beginning of the cycle, you have this little pool of follicles. And that little pool of follicles, as they're developing, each one is kind of kicking out a little bit of that anti-Müllerian hormone, AMH, that I'm sure we'll be talking about. And so, when you're younger, so if you're in your 20s or if you're in your late teens, that little pool of follicles is larger. So then when we look at the main ovarian reserve parameters that include the AMH, the anti-Müllerian hormone, and we look at the antral follicle count for a younger woman at the earlier stages of her reproductive life, like I said, at the beginning of that cycle, she has a bigger pool of follicles. Those follicles are then kicking out AMH, and so she's going to have higher AMH levels. But what ultimately happens is that one of those follicles is typically chosen then to move on to ovulation. So you have all these immature antral follicles at the beginning, and then you move toward ovulation. One is inevitably chosen, and it becomes the dominant follicle. It expands to about 20 times the size, and the follicle is putting out estrogen. So, that dominant follicle then, that's why we have these estrogen levels in production. And that is why the quality and the development of that follicle is directly related to our hormonal outputs. And that is a really interesting way to look at it as well, because when you're tracking your cycle in I teach a really detailed tracking method with, tracking cervical fluid and temperature and all that kind of stuff. And so, the cervical fluid is kind of a proxy for what's happening hormonally, in a healthy woman when we have no issues with the cervix itself and we're producing mucus normally. So that's kind of, just to give you a sense of what's going on there. And so we have, what's interesting about the AMH level is that what the researchers found that made them really excited was that there was this correlation. So we have more those antral follicles, higher AMH levels, so higher antral follicle count at these younger ages. And then as we get older, it gradually reduces. So when you're, in your 30s or in your 40s, you would have a lower antral follicle count overall. You would have a lower AMH level. And what they do is they make that relationship between that kind of pool, how big that pool is, and what your remaining ovarian reserve is. So this is kind of what was happening. They were seeing this relationship where younger women would have higher levels and then they would kind of gradually decline as they get older. So they made this connection like, okay, this is related to how much you have left. This is related to the ovarian reserve. So when we think about, sperm testing, men ejaculate into a cup and we're able to just count how much is there, right? So it's pretty straightforward, but no one's cutting out your ovaries to count how many eggs you have left. That's not a thing. It's not possible. So we can never get an actual count like we would with sperm. It's always going to be a proxy. It's always going to be an estimate. But that estimate doesn't reflect the quality because that's not the measure that it is really. It's really reflecting, it's an estimate of the remaining amount, if that makes sense. So I'll just pause there and let you ask away.
Yeah, no, this was all really good. Okay, I have two main questions right now. First question is, can you, just going back to basics again, can you describe the difference between a follicle and an egg? Is there a difference between those two?
Well, so the follicle is essentially like the sac that holds the egg.
Okay, so do we then have all of the follicles that we'll ever have, or all of the eggs that we'll ever have, or can you interchange that language?
It's both.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the follicle is what is surrounding the egg.
Yeah.
Is what I'm understanding. Okay.
But it's kind of because that's what it's in. Then it's kind of like they're not the same word, but you kind of use the word at the same part of the sentence.
Yes. Got it. Okay. Just wanted to confirm. And then AMH. So AMH levels. When you get your AMH tested, you're trying to understand quantity of eggs. Am I understanding that right? Not quality.
Well, yeah. What's interesting about it, right? Because most people automatically assume that it means that this is the quality. But when you look at what it's actually doing, so again, at the beginning of the cycle, you have this pool of follicles, and that pool of follicles is related to how many eggs you have left. So therefore it's related to your age. And that pool is going to be larger when you're 20 versus when you're 30 and when you're 40. There's always going to be this decline. As we discussed, when you're in utero, you have more eggs than when you're born. You have more eggs when you're born than you do at puberty. And there's a gradual kind of this natural process of essentially reabsorption that takes place because it's estimated that if a woman's not on contraceptives, that she's having maybe 500 periods or 500 instances of ovulation over her reproductive life. So obviously, if you have 1 million eggs and you only lost 500, right? So it doesn't work like that, right? So you are, each time you move toward ovulation, you have several eggs that are developing. Obviously, that one is chosen to move forward, and the rest of them are being reabsorbed. And just since we're talking about this, I think there's just this really interesting idea out there that if you're on birth control and you're not ovulating, it means that your eggs are being saved or something like that. So which is not true. So this process of kind of gradual, like follicular atresia or gradual reabsorption happens even if you're on the pill. Because obviously there's plenty of women that have been on the pill for like 20 years. It's not like now I'm going through menopause at 75. Like, no, that's
right.
That's not what's happening.
Right. Because they're still atrophying. Like they're still, okay. Yeah. You're just not ovulating them. But in all reality, if you have them.
Similar to that space between birth and puberty, like you're not ovulating either, but we're still seeing this kind of natural process play out.
Right. Okay. And if you're in all reality, if you're never on contraception and you're ovulating about 500 throughout your life, it's 500 to 1 million.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's like a drop in the water of what you're actually ovulating versus the amount of eggs that you actually have. So that makes sense. Yeah. So, okay. So when we're testing the AMH levels, let's say you get tested at, I don't know, let's say you get tested at 28 and let's say it's low for whatever reason. Well, actually, I guess I have two questions.
Well, so just for that, like there's going to be different ranges for those different age categories, right? Because
Okay,
what would
yes.
be normal for 28 is going to be different than what would be normal for like 19, which is going to be different to what would be normal for 40.
Okay. So let's say, okay, whatever age you're at then,
Yeah.
you get tested and you're on the low end. Does that mean that you just have less eggs than the average woman? Does that mean like what would that mean if you have low AMH levels, which would then mean I would assume that you have low egg count. Is there any hope for you to get pregnant one day? Like what does that indicate if you have low AMH levels for your age range?
So let me try to like I want to answer the question simply, but then I also want to kind of like explain it. So
Yeah.
with AMH, what like I said, what's interesting when you read the research is the researchers were really excited to find this kind of linear connection between this measurable hormone and kind of where women are on this reproductive spectrum kind of thing. It seems like they thought it was like the holy grail. It was like now we can predict when women are going to go into menopause and like now, right? Like it was kind of like this, it was supposed to be this thing. And there seemed to be this idea that it was fixed and genetically inherited and not changeable. So there was kind of this idea that if the AMH is low, that, you know, you got that from your grandma and there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you can do to change it and all that kind of stuff. And so the interesting thing is that again, when you look at the research, there's research studies that put some of that into question. So there definitely is this relationship with age, and that is one of the strongest relationships with fertility. So definitely you're not going to have the same AMH at 40 than you would at 20. But the range within what would be normal for 40 is there's a range. When we look at certain studies, so for example, women who have endometriosis are likely to have lower AMH levels. Women who have PCOS, which is characterized in many women by like polycystic ovaries, right? So having multiple ovarian follicles that are immature and not moving toward ovulation. So if you have a whole bunch of little follicles that are immature, and those little follicles are what are kicking out the AMH, then interestingly, women with PCOS would have elevated AMH. But does that mean that they have way more eggs in the reserve? Not exactly. There's an interesting study where they gave women like a high dose of vitamin D toward the beginning of the cycle. And that dose of vitamin D improved AMH levels for the women in the study. And there's other studies that have shown that women have higher AMH in the summer and lower in the winter, right? Due to the sunshine. So it's not to say that AMH, the only point that I'm making here is that the strongest relationship would be age. So it's not that we throw it out, but it's not fixed, is
Okay.
that's the point that I'm making. So it was,
Gotcha.
and I've had clients whose doctors have told them that if their AMH is low, that they won't be able to get pregnant. It means they're about to go into menopause and all this stuff. But what I'm trying to share by sharing these different studies is that there are other factors that impact AMH levels. So that would be the first point that I want to make.
I want to interrupt this episode to tell you about We Heart Nutrition. This is a company that is family owned and offers wholesome, research backed supplements for both men and women. Their products are crafted with integrity using clinical doses of research backed, most absorbable forms of each nutrient. And what I love most about this company, you guys, is that it is pro life. 10% of every sale they give to the pro life cause and supporting pregnancy care centers. So it's amazing. This is definitely a place that I want to support. So I have been taking the prenatal vitamins and their magnesium supplements. And first of all, I feel like I'm just in a season of life where I'm just always taking a prenatal, whether I'm pregnant or nursing or preparing for a pregnancy. I really love that I am taking a prenatal that I can trust, and also the magnesium helping with good sleep, especially when I have those babies waking me up during the middle of the night. So go to weheartnutrition.com and use the code TRUTH to get 20% off of your first order. That's code TRUTH for 20% off your first order. I know you're going to love them.
The second point that I want to make is, I think, the most important one, which is when you look at the research, there's not really a lot of debate as to what AMH is most effective at predicting. And it's not whether or not you're going to conceive naturally. So what the research shows very clearly, it's not a random study, it's all of them, is that AMH is most useful at predicting how well your ovaries are going to respond to IVF stimulation. So, I mean, AMH is a proxy, well, it's a proxy for the remaining reserve, but it's also telling us, it's reflective of how many ovarian follicles that you have at that kind of immature stage in any given cycle, right? So if you're doing an IVF stimulation situation where they're giving you drugs to grow, because in a normal ovulation, you ovulate typically one,
Yeah.
if there's fraternal twins, there might be two, like
Sure.
each ovary might have one or something, but typically like one is chosen and that's it. But with IVF and artificial reproductive technology, when they're trying to harvest multiple eggs, multiple follicles, right? Then they're going to give you the stimulation drugs. And depending on how many immature follicles you have in there, they're going to kind of artificially pump all of those, right?
I
So they can
see.
take them out and right. So if you then have high AMH or like normal, let's say you have normal AMH, so it's good. If you were to do an IVF procedure, that normal AMH means that you have more of those follicles developing. So if they're going to stimulate you, then that means that they're going to most likely get a better yield. Hello.
Right. Right.
And then if it was too low and they wanted to stimulate you, there's not really much there to stimulate, so they're not going to get a good yield. So consistently in the research, like, and I stress this so much because it's paper after paper, meta-analysis after meta-analysis. It's not one of those things where it's like you have to search for it. It's just the consistent like conclusion that they make. If the AMH is best for predicting how well you'll respond to IVF stimulation. And similarly, if you had PCOS and your AMH was really high, that is a predictor that you may overstimulate. And that can be a really significant problem. Like if you had like a lot of eggs and they stimulate you, and it can cause the ovaries to be really enlarged, really painful. And in like the worst, most severe cases, it could even cause death. But
Wow.
again, so there's that. But then when it comes to like you trying to conceive naturally, not going through artificial reproductive technology, there's not strong evidence that the AMH by itself is going to predict whether or not you could conceive or carry a baby to term. So what's really ridiculous and unfortunate about the AMH number is that it's like being yielded as like a weapon. Women are being told that they're going to go into menopause early. Women are being told that they won't be able to conceive naturally when the evidence is quite clear that it's best and most effectively used to let us know how well you're going to stimulate and respond to the ART.
Okay. Okay. I'm glad you said that. That makes a lot of sense. So we've been talking about egg quantity. Let's move into egg quality. Is this something that can be tested by a hormone? Is it like, how do we know if you have bad or good egg quality? Is that set in stone, or is that something that can be improved?
Well, so I think it's a little trickier because I think in order to test the quality of a woman's egg, it has to be taken out of her ovaries and examined in a lab.
Sure.
So
That puts a little bit of a barrier, right?
yeah, like to some degree. So I would argue that when we look at the menstrual cycle as a vital sign, when we understand what's happening hormonally, there are signs that we can take a look at to kind of indirectly. I think especially when you view the menstrual cycle from that lens, I mean, if you, for example, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it, but what I've already said is that when we're moving into ovulation, that dominant follicle is chosen, and I've indicated that if that follicle, so that, the egg contained in there, if it has developed well, if it has grown to a sufficient size, then that is going to correspond with our hormone levels because the size of it and the health of it is directly correlated to how much estrogen that it's pumping out, and even correlated then because what happens when you ovulate is that your the follicle releases the egg, so you literally like the ovary literally bursts open, and that same follicle that released the egg, it then turns into the corpus luteum, which then starts producing progesterone. So it stands to reason that the quality of the egg and how well it had formed and the strength of the hormones that it was putting out, it stands to reason that then that's going to be related to how strong that corpus luteum is and how effective it is at producing progesterone during that luteal phase. So I think that we can indirectly then look at the cycle and gather some not necessarily direct information, but indirect information. So we can look at the length of your cycle. We can look at when ovulation is happening. We can look at your cervical mucus production. We can look at the length and quality of your luteal phase. And there are studies that have been done, to test those hormone levels. And that's, again, a direct relation. So in that respect, I think so. But when we look at research studies, so for example, in the egg quality chapter, we list a number of different nutrients that have been associated with improving egg quality. A lot of that research is often done in the context of artificial reproductive technology. When you're looking for science to try to help us to understand what is helping egg quality or sperm quality or anything like that, we often have to ask, well, who has the money to do the research, right? And so, that at the end of the day, we get a lot of the studies that inform us about which nutrients have been shown to improve egg quality and things like that are coming out of the artificial reproductive tech. And it makes logical sense when you think about it like that. Right. And in that capacity, they have the ability then potentially to be looking at the eggs under a microscope, but I guess to take it back to your original question, when we are looking at AMH, when we are looking at antral follicle count, when we are looking at, follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, or these other hormones, they're often telling us more about especially the ovarian reserve parameters, especially AMH and antral follicle count. They're often telling us more about the actual, estimated reserve. So the number, the quantity, but by definition, they are not giving you any information about the actual quality of those eggs. So it's possible then that, the AMH could be a bit subpar, but that doesn't, again, that's why the research consistently shows that it doesn't mean that pregnancy is impossible. So there are studies that have found women to successfully conceive with undetectable AMH levels.
Wow. Because
it doesn't mean that that's optimal.
Sure.
Well, because it's not related. It's not this number is just not I can't stress enough that it's just, if you can have a woman with undetectable AMH who has conceived and carry, and when you have, women who are going through IVF, so the AMH would, like I said, be most helpful at predicting how they're going to respond to stimulation. But when you look at the studies that then look at, does AMH correlate to the likelihood that this woman, after having those eggs, sorted out and implanted, does it correlate to her being able to successfully carry this baby to term? They don't correlate. So I think that's the tricky part. So, and it's hard because I understand, if you're listening, if you're listening to this, so to the listener who's like, I was told that my AMH is low and I would never be able to have, if that is a very common experience, women are being told this. But what I'm saying is, when we look at the research, I don't think it's something, it's not great news to have low AMH, I suppose, right? But I've seen AMH numbers improve. You're not going to be 40 and then improve it to 20-year-old levels, but within what would be normal for 40, there is some leeway, especially if you are focusing on nutrition, if you're focusing on even vitamin D levels. Like I said, that study was really interesting. Or if you have an inflammatory condition like endometriosis and you kind of get that under control, there are factors that can even change those numbers. But regardless of that, the AMH number should not determine by anybody. It should not be used to try to estimate your chances of natural conception, because it's really just helpful for, are you going to stim well? For ART.
Yeah. Okay. So you said something really interesting there about how, the follicle itself, right? That's the house of the egg. That's producing estrogen in your cycle. And then what was the follicle after ovulation, which is now the corpus luteum, that's producing progesterone. So that right there, from what I'm understanding, is by your hormone levels, even of just the estrogen and progesterone ebb and flow throughout the natural cycle, that in and of itself can give us a good understanding of egg quality. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I mean, let me give you an example. So, because I've worked with many clients over the years, so it's like you start charting your cycle, you have these concerns, maybe your mucus production is low, but that is not always directly correlated because sometimes there can be issues with the cervix as well, or if you have a long history of birth control use, which can have a negative impact on mucus production. But either way, we can look at that. But we can also look at the luteal phase. I think one of the most interesting things with charting in a specific way to kind of and also looking at the menstrual cycle as that vital sign is that when you look at the luteal phase, so if I have a client, we're working together, she's working out a lot, maybe not getting enough to eat, we're seeing a short luteal phase, like we're seeing maybe like 8, 9 days or something like that, or we're seeing premenstrual spotting or whatever the case. So that indirectly tells you something about potentially about the follicle and also about the corpus luteum and its ability to actually produce sufficient hormone to have a healthy luteal phase. And so if I'm working with this woman and we are kind of working on some of these foundational factors, um, sorry, I just have to, do you mind if I pause for a second?
You know what? That's actually good because this is good timing because my computer I actually have to plug it in because it just said low battery. So this is good.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. I don't know if you could hear that, but I have a lovely woman who comes to help me clean my house. And I find like anytime I'm on a podcast, I like text her this morning. I was like, please not between 11 and 12. And she's fully vacuuming.
You know what? I couldn't hear it. I forgot my my AirPods today. And so I was just like, you know what? We're just going to go. It's good. But that was really good timing because literally you paused and my computer said low battery. And I'm like, okay, this is good. So
yes, what's not so great is that I was on a roll and I did want to keep going.
I know. But, okay. You were talking about, okay.
I was talking about the egg, like I was trying to get at the short luteal phase and the progesterone.
Yes. Yeah. If you're working out too much and then you don't have, I know. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll just jump in and I'm sure
let's just jump in.
My apologies.
Yeah. No worries. All good.
Well, so since the menstrual cycle is kind of a proxy for what's happening hormonally, then if I have a client that's kind of starting out with this suboptimal situation, and then we start addressing the foundational factors. So we address the nutrition piece of it. Maybe we look at the stress levels. Maybe we look at her sleep habits. Maybe there's even an underlying issue like with her thyroid or something like that. But when you start to see then, the mucus production improve, that could potentially be a sign that her estrogen levels are improving, which would potentially be a sign that the follicle is developing better. And then when we see the luteal phase lengthen from 8 days to 12 days, when we see the spotting, dissipate or, at least significantly reduce. So I think from that perspective, and then of course you can do lab testing to test the hormone levels as well. But I think that there is an argument to be made, of course, that we can kind of see that connection.
Mm-hmm. It's something. I've had this in my brain as you're talking because I do not want to forget to ask you this. You said something about how mucus production, I mean, overall, yes, I think it is a good indicator of your hormones, of your estrogen and what's going on there. But you said something about how when a woman is on birth control, right, it affects her cervix, it ages her cervix. And so the cervix is what's producing that mucus. So I don't know if I have a question here, but just want to outline something really important that you said, that because if you have anything affecting your not estrogen, but your mucus production, which is affected by your estrogen, but if it's not talking to if your cervix isn't able to respond well to that estrogen that your body is producing, either because you were on birth control and it aged your cervix and your cervix is unable to produce that same quality type of mucus, that might not actually be the best indicator for your estrogen levels, which then may not actually be the best indicator of egg production or your egg quality. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, you are. So that, I mean, basically what it is like uh, from my perspective, you just have to examine the situation. So you have to be aware of the different factors. So, for example, if somebody did have an invasive HPV situation and they needed to have, whether it was a conization or a Leeds procedure or something like that to remove the abnormal cervical cells, I've certainly seen that impact cervical mucus production.
Sure.
And
Okay.
so then in a case like that, there still could be both things. There still could be low estrogen and this issue, but you just kind of have to look at those factors. And like you said, then that means that you may not be able to take those mucus production observations at face value. You kind of have to take it in context.
I see. So in order to understand your egg quality better then, and of course in context with the woman and her situation and her history, but would it be better to just get blood work done to understand your estrogen and progesterone levels than to necessarily take it on your chart face value?
So, I mean, the way that I look at it is, and it's probably a little bit different because of the modality that I live in. Of course, I mean, it can certainly be helpful. I think that first and foremost, it depends on what's happening. I think that we want to understand, although it's not easy to hear, but we want to understand that age is still one of the most significant factors when it comes to fertility. And so I don't think of that as the doom and gloom though. So I'm just saying that to be aware of it. And
Yeah.
I say that so that we can kind of strategize. So if you're in your 20s, there's a huge argument to be eating nutritious food if you're trying to conceive and things like that. But statistically speaking, the quality of your eggs is kind of it's still a factor, but in your 20s you're on like good ground in many ways. So I feel like the primary focus would be on nutrition, supporting sperm quality, understanding timing. By supporting nutrition, you are also going to support egg quality as well. I think my approach is a little bit different for women in their 30s and early 40s, not for any other reason other than we just know that is a time when we're more susceptible to oxidative stress. That is even chromosomal abnormalities are more common. So we still need a heavy focus on nutrition. But for example, in the egg quality chapter of Real Food for Fertility, we also then take the additional step to learn more about the key nutrients that support egg quality. So one of the interesting pieces of information about the human egg that can kind of direct how we sort this out is understanding the influence of mitochondria. So in a typical like liver cell, we might have a few thousand mitochondria, which is even mind-blowing. My son is in the 8th grade and he was working on this project a month ago. And so he drew the cell and all of that. And
Yeah,
it's so
I remember
funny
doing
because
that.
because there's like one mitochondria in it. And so then to learn that a liver cell has like a couple thousand, like I never saw
Yeah.
any diagram like that. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
But if we talk about the egg cell, the human egg cell, so the human egg cell is the largest cell in the body. It's the only cell that's visible to the naked eye. It's about the size of a period on a
Oh,
piece of paper. And guess how many mitochondria are found in the human egg cell?
I don't even. I'll just say 1,000.
Okay, 100,000 to 600,000.
Oh my gosh. And that's in just one
Correct.
cell, because an egg is just one cell, right?
Correct. So,
That's
I mean, I want to
insane.
see the diagram on that, right?
I
Because
know,
that
right?
whatever's in the science book doesn't look like that. But
Yeah.
so that's really interesting. Obviously, if you think about that, it makes sense again, though, if you backtrack and you're like, well, I mean, what does the egg do? It builds a human,
Right.
and
Right.
and it's maternal mitochondria that survive. So when the sperm fertilizes the egg, the mitochondria from him are not like they're done. They're like
Huh.
kaput. It's only the
Okay.
maternal mitochondria that continues. So mom's mitochondria is actually really important because that is all that we have. All of us only have our mom's mitochondria. So that's a whole other thing. But if we think about that from that perspective, then we know that mitochondria are basically the power sources for the cell. And it makes logical sense when you think about that. This is the cell that builds a human being, that we have so many of them. And so what is one of the most important things we can do then to support egg quality? Well, we have to support the mitochondria. So that's why there's so much research on coenzyme Q10 and L-carnitine and all these key nutrients that specifically support mitochondrial health. And then there's a lot of research on antioxidants, like N-acetylcysteine or, even vitamin C and all these different antioxidants. Because when we look at what needs to happen for successful fertilization and a baby to develop normally, we need to have, proper chromosomal division. We have to have, DNA intact. And I mean, that's one of the issues with sperm quality when there's a high percentage of sperm DNA damage. And interestingly, the human egg has the capacity to some degree to repair the human egg. I mean, it's so interesting. I feel like I could spend a whole lifetime studying some of these things.
Yeah.
But the human egg has the capacity to repair to some degree sperm DNA damage, but that directly correlates to how it directly correlates to the quality of the egg itself. So we would have a stronger capacity to overcome if our partner's sperm DNA was not optimal when we're younger versus when we're older. But then, of course, if we are really focused on supporting egg quality, feeding those mitochondria, learning about which nutrients to incorporate, ensuring that we are learning more about nutrition, what we need to do to support fertility, then we're putting ourselves in a much better position. So I think with egg quality, I would love to kind of end on a positive note, which is that although there's aspects of it that are fixed, the age piece, there is a limit. I am 42, so there's nothing I could do to make my eggs exactly what they were at age 20. But within my 42-year-old age, I'm not planning to have more children. But if that was the thing that I was doing, there's a lot that I can do within my age category to really support my mitochondrial health, really support my nutritional reserves. And also, we have been talking primarily about egg quality. Sperm quality is a whole topic that needs equal attention, because while we are the ones that hold the babies and carry them and push them out and breastfeed them, all three of my children came out looking exactly like their dad. So never forget that he is 50% of the genetic material, and the quality of his sperm has a direct impact even on the formation of your placenta. So his contribution is very, very important. So it's, of course, easier for us within our control to really focus on egg quality, which is really important, but it's literally 50% of the equation.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if I'm getting the age piece correct too, obviously we've talked about the quantity goes down and gets to a point where it's null. You hit menopause and you're not ovulating anymore. You're not cycling anymore. You don't have any more eggs. So am I understanding it right though, that quality does go down too, just naturally with age as well?
It does. We're more susceptible to oxidative stress, which oxidative stress, like think of the banana turning brown, but we're more susceptible to that. And then the way that it works from a genetic standpoint in a very simplified explanation is that each individual person, we have 46 chromosomes. And then during that process, during those months leading up to ovulation, at some point the 46 chromosomes divides into half, so that we have, our egg cell has the 23, his sperm has the 23. So division errors when it comes to chromosomal abnormalities increase as we age, and that is related to both egg and sperm quality. So this is one of the reasons why we really want to focus on nutrition. We really want to support the mitochondria. We really want to support, we want to incorporate as many of the antioxidants as possible, because then that helps that process to go more smoothly.
Yeah. And so when you're trying to improve the quality of your eggs, in all reality, is that the same as trying to improve the quality of your hormone fluctuations like estrogen and progesterone, because since those hormones are coming from the follicle, or is there a difference there?
I mean, to some extent, because you can support hormone production, largely through nutrition and, it just really depends on the situation. So assuming there's no, underlying health issue as well, like you can really, but you can also then, if there is an underlying health issue, by attending to that, then that can also help hormone production. When I think of egg quality, I just think of kind of going that extra mile. So nutrition plus also key supplementation is needed. So I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of, there would be an additional step that you can take by
Okay.
taking key supplements that are known. Like I said, I mentioned coenzyme Q10, I mentioned L-carnitine. There's a lot of research on omega-3 fatty acids, so eating fish or taking fish oil. There's a lot of research on vitamin A and its importance for reproduction overall. So and vitamin A, retinol from animal sources. Vitamin
Mm-hmm.
D is important. So I think in addition, they all work together though, because if you're really focusing on supporting egg quality, you would also see those shifts in your cycle. So I do think they go together, but I think there's additional steps that you might go beyond other, like if you were not trying to conceive at all and you were just trying to focus on your hormones, there may be steps that you wouldn't also take because that's not really your main concern right now.
Okay, I see. Yeah, because you said diet, and that just there's so much right now of trying to regulate your menstrual cycle with diet and trying to support your hormones with diet. And so that's why I was wondering, okay, what, it can that be interchangeable of, using diet to support your hormones, but in all reality, that's also supporting your egg quality because some of your hormones, the reproductive hormones, are coming from that follicle, which is holding the egg. So I was trying to understand like is
Well,
it the
I mean,
same or
it's
is there, you
definitely
said there's extra
connected.
steps?
So, for example, like I mentioned, vitamin A, we could talk about the
Hmm.
importance of zinc or folate for egg quality, omega-3 fatty acids, like I mentioned. And so through diet, there's a lot that you can do. I talk a lot about liver because it's nature's multivitamin. It's a great source of vitamin A, but also B vitamins like folate. It's a great source of choline. It's a great source of zinc and selenium. And all of these nutrients support egg quality. And, we could talk about eating seafood if that's a thing, fish and seafood. Oysters, shellfish are a great source of zinc, B vitamins, and omega-3 fatty acids, especially. I'm always like, eat the skin of the fish too. So there's a lot that you can do through diet to support your hormones, to
Mm.
build up those nutrient stores. And I mean, ultimately, we've been talking a lot about egg quality. We definitely want the egg to be in tip-top form, but we also need to have nutrient stores so that when the egg is fertilized and we're growing a baby, that we have the nutritional stores to support the baby without. I often compare that, our nutrient stores leading up to pregnancy and during and then in postpartum as a bank account. And what happens at that time of life, and I can say this as a mom of three, is withdrawals. That's what that's
Mm-hmm.
largely what happens. So there's a lot of things that come together that support. So by focusing on nutrition, by focusing on, key supplementation, you are kind of hitting three birds with one stone. You're supporting your hormonal health, you're supporting menstrual cycle health, you're supporting egg quality, but you're also building those nutrition stores preconception so that you can, go through that stage. And at the because I always say at the end of it, you have a baby who doesn't sleep and who wants to drink, like you're making food with your body that your baby
Yeah.
is sucking out of you. So if you want to be in as good of a nutritional standpoint as you can be,
Right.
because that, motherhood is a very demanding profession.
Job.
Yes.
Profession. Yes. Yeah. Lisa, I feel like we could talk for a long time still about this, but to wrap up, is there anything else that you want our listeners to know just about maybe a practical tip? I mean, we've been talking about diet, but of improving egg quality or just, for the listener that's really trying to get pregnant and is struggling or is struggling with their hormones, like what advice, what tip would you give them?
I mean, I feel like we've gone through quite a bit. I
Hmm.
think that it's really important to learn about your cycle, learn about how it works, learn how to identify ovulation in the cycle. Consider tracking your cycle, especially if you're actively trying to conceive or planning to, because that can allow you to, first of all, from a very practical standpoint, to know when you're fertile in your cycle. And spoiler
Hmm.
alert, it's not always day 14. And it can also provide you with some information and insight that you wouldn't necessarily get other ways. I know that it's a thing like, everyone is really into the lab testing and all of that, but unless you're testing those labs like all the time, like with the menstrual charting, it's not a lab test, but it gives you these insights all through your cycle. And then when you chart for 3, 4, 5 cycles and you actually can see oh, I did this thing and this is how it's affecting it, it really can give you a lot of useful information. And, this is the reason why Lily and I teamed up. So, you know, Lily Nichols, registered dietitian, nutritionist, and myself, we actually wrote our books. So when I was writing The Fifth Vital Sign, she was writing Real Food for Pregnancy, and we were book buddies. And so we've been friends for a long time. And after we released our books, anytime someone would be asking about nutrition to support menstrual cycle health, I would be directing them to Real Food for Pregnancy. And I'd be like, well, and even if you're not trying to get pregnant, still read it because
yeah.
And then when she would get the questions about, well, fertility and planning to conceive, she would be directing them to The Fifth Vital Sign, right? So this was us bringing all this information together. And so while our, the book title is Real Food for Fertility, the question of women who are not necessarily trying to conceive but wanting to support hormonal health, the nutritional strategies in that book are designed for that exact purpose, right?
Yeah.
So if this is something that's important to you and this conversation really piqued your interest, you'll find a really strong nutritional foundation there with everything we talked about, but a lot more detail and of course tons and tons of research that we reference. And the specific strategies for conception from a fertility awareness standpoint, we didn't get into a ton of it, but they're also there. And then even with our egg and sperm quality chapters, I can't stress enough, for couples who have been trying to conceive for a year or more, and it's not happening, statistically speaking, from that statistical standpoint, it's not likely that his sperm is optimal. And there's a whole missing conversation. I really have never had a client who's been properly informed about these things. So there's a lot to know. And I think if there was one thing I'd want you to leave with is that there's hope. When we look at what the science has to say and we share it, we can just be so much more informed and just feel so much more confident about our decisions. And that's why I do what I do. And I'm sure that that's why you do what you do. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's such good stuff. Well, if somebody wanted to find you, how can they do that?
Well, so my podcast, Fertility Friday, has been going on for the past 11 years. Isn't that crazy?
That's amazing. That's amazing.
This month, actually, I'm not sure when this is being released, but November 2025 is like the 11-year anniversary, which is crazy. So if you type Fertility Friday in your favorite podcast player, you will find me. I'm the pink one because now there is someone else who has also taken that name. And,
what?
I know. It's
How can they even do that? There should be you can't mix names. Oh my goodness.
I know.
Okay, you're the pink one. You're the pink one.
I'm the pink one. And for any women's health practitioners, that's been a big focus of what I've been doing these days. Now I train women's health professionals to use the menstrual cycle as a diagnostic, which has been super fun. So
Amazing.
We've created some fun resources. I have an ebook, How to Interpret Virtually Any Chart Your Client Throws at You, fertilityfriday.com/chart. And then you can also find me at fertilityfriday.com. I'm on Instagram at Fertility Friday. And of course, you've mentioned my books, so thank you for that. You can find them on Amazon. And if you are particularly interested in the Real Food for Fertility, realfoodforfertility.com, grab the first chapter for free. Take a look.
Okay. Awesome. I'll put all of that in the show notes too, so people don't have to go searching. So Lisa, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks again for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Truth and Fertility Podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please leave a 5-star review. That helps me tremendously. For more information about learning to chart your fertility cycle, you can visit truthandfertility.com, and I'll talk to you guys again next week.